Welcome to another episode of Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Vrinda Sasidhar, Vice President of HR Consulting at HSBC. Vrinda brings over 15 years of experience in HR across banking, tech, and process outsourcing sectors, and she's here to share her unique perspective on how HR and finance teams are working more closely together than ever before. In our conversation, we explore how Vrinda's background in psychology influences her approach to HR, how the partnership between HR and finance has evolved, and what skill sets are becoming essential for young finance professionals as technology continues to transform the industry. Whether you're interested in how organizations are adapting to rapid change or looking for practical strategies to stay ahead, you want to tune in for Vrinda's insights on continuous learning and her thoughts on building resilient, collaborative teams for the future. Well, Vrinda, I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. And today we're going to be talking about intersection of HR and finance. And you have a lot of experience with HR. And have you seen the intersection of HR and finance kind of evolve over the years, especially in the experience that you've had?
So let me just give you a little bit of background of what I have done to then tell you, what I have probably experienced in these 15 years actually of being in HR. So a large part of my experience within HR has been in learning, in DEI, in employee engagement. And this experience has been across banking, across tech, across what we call process outsourcing sectors, right? And each sector has of course, its unique problems and, of course, unique, interesting things to solve for. So currently I work with a leading bank, and I've been with the bank for 8 years across 4 roles. And a large part has been in developing people and culture. And for teams in finance, it's where our conversation is really largely going to be around. And my latest role, of course, is in HR consulting, which is a little broader than finance. So, and the reason I speak about this, this journey that I've had is because it's been quite interesting for me to see how my role has evolved in HR as well. So, I mean, one of the things I've seen that's happened through these years is that HR has definitely become more strategic. I can see that business calls us more on the table. There's a lot of work together that we do, especially in pieces when it comes to optimizing resources, right? So it could be not just people. I think people usually, you think of HR and you think of people resources, but our work now becomes a little more broader. We are involved in people, in money, in data, in tech, because a lot of HR policies are really geared into some of these conversations as well. So I think that's where our strategic partnership really comes in. I think the second, I would say, main piece that we have been really working on is, while we talk about talent strategies, now there's an increased alignment to what we call people priorities that business sets out to have, right? So that is your workforce planning, your recruitment, your performance management, your succession planning, all of that. And like I said, did we do that before? Sure. But there's obviously increased alignment with business as well. And finally, I'm sure we all know, we keep talking about changes, we keep talking about future of finance. I say now it's no more future of finance, it's now of finance, right? So adapting to those market changes, changes in industry. So I think HR really needs to focus on not only helping the organization, but now the whole conversation on protecting individuals and individual well-being as well has become a lot more important than probably the previous when I got started. So I think that's a good way of saying these are 3 things I've seen over my journey in HR.
Well, and when you and I first spoke, you mentioned you had a little bit of a background in psychology. How do you think your understanding of things like human behavior have kind of influenced your approach with HR, especially in the context of working with different teams? Because you say that your role is evolving, especially in how you work with people, but we have to understand how people work too.
Right. Adam, it's just not finance. I think psychology has just had an impact generally on my views and perspective, right? And of course, it's a good result in the work that I do. And I think you've said it, right? It is about human behavior. It is about understanding what are we delivering and for who we are delivering, right? For me, I think HR, it's a gift to be in HR, right? One of the key roles that we have is to be that communication channel between employees and leadership. So are we able to convey, I would say, important decisions to the wider audience? Are we able to share insights that we receive from the masses to leadership? And it is in our gift as HR. I know that so many people who come up to me, not just in formal setups, right? Even in those informal setups. So I think psychology helps in transitioning and translating these insights that we hear from both ends, into something that's actionable. And of course, using human principles really help us to kind of then convert it into something meaningful for our people, and which of course makes sense for the organization. That's one. Of course, a lot of focus and a lot of work that we do is around employee engagement and motivation, understanding what drives employees. Every country is different. Maturity of an organization is different. There are changes that are happening rapidly, and everything has an impact on this. So HR needs to be almost able to detect that pulse, I would say, and know what the employees need now, instead of always thinking, this is what they require, because everything is different. So if the organization is extremely volatile, then you need to start thinking about, say, psychological safety, because that's the need for now. Resourcing is an issue, and the organization is, getting their folks to pull long hours in. Then how do you acknowledge, how do you reward immediately, so that people feel like contributing to that current environment, if I can say so, right? And I think psychology, and I'm sure you agree as well, provides those tools for managing change within an organization. There's so many psychological, I would say, principles that also guide effective communication to mitigate resistance, to mitigate any kind of issues that come from change, and to foster that culture and that climate within the organization. We talk about data-driven decision making, and I'm sure we're going to be talking a lot about it in the context of finance. Now, it's important to convert these decisions as well to something that we understand as an organization. So what do we do with that data? And I can go on and on and on. It's one of my favorite topics. But like I said, it's not only my work. I think psychology has just impacted the way and perspective of how I look at everything.
So as we look at the ever-evolving role of the changing landscape for finance, the changing landscape for pretty much any of the industry, any of the groups within an organization, young graduates are looking to enter the field. What are your insights for young folks coming into the finance team? Because it doesn't look the same it did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. They have a lot of different challenges. They're not going to come in and do grunt work right away. A lot of the grunt work's taken care of by AI nowadays. So there's different skills that they're going to have. What does that look like as you see it when new folks are coming into your organization?
Yeah, absolutely right. Like I said, finance is quickly evolving. I've been with the bank for 8 years, and every 2 years there's a shift.
Yeah.
I think some of the thing, and I'm talking from data, right? Some research, market research on finance. So currently, finance leaders spend about 19% more of the total finance bandwidth on value-added activities. So say strategic planning, treasury, operational risk management, policy setting. That's not the case 10 years ago, right? That it was absolutely generating those reports on and on and on, right? So that's a big change. I think I read it a few months ago about saying that a lack of skills in data literacy can cost a company as much as 1% of the revenue, right? So data is such a valuable resource, right? So now we can see 70% of finance organizations are using data lineage enabling technologies. So machine learning, I think graph analytics, etc., and so on and so forth. The reason I'm telling you all of this is that in finance, we in India especially, right, where I'm coming from, we look at it from a quite a linear view, saying that you do your accountancy, you do your your CA, as we call it in India, and you're good, you have your basics in banking. But that has changed. Those roles are not going to exist. In fact, they say by 2028 50% of organizations would have replaced time-consuming bottom-up forecasting approaches with, like what you said, AI, demand planning, etc. So the call for the hour for the young grad, one, is to be saying that Yes, I've gone through this formal education, but do I understand what exists in the market? Do I understand the digital first approach? What banks are doing what? What does automation look like from a practical view? Because you can read a lot of great articles out of those magazines, but what is actually happening on ground? What are some of the skills that you can update yourself on? Are you thinking about, so when you think about data, the single use of data, are you thinking about even the ethical side of using that data? So do you understand banking regulations are, up there, right? So what are the regulatory measures that our firms are pushing? So do you know enough about that, right? We're talking about sustainable finance. If that's something of interest to you, what does that mean? Have you read up on that? So I think one is understanding that you might be a young grad that's passed out today, but probably in 6 months' time, I'm not going to say it's going to be outdated. I think fundamentals are always going to remain the same, but are you understanding these changes that's happening in the industry? And that can only come from, of course, experience, but it also means that you need to continuously develop yourself. Someone told me that you need to look at your resume, and every 6 months, if you don't have something new to put in there, that means you're late, right? You're late in learning something new, which is such an interesting way of looking at it. So that's something I've learned, and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Maybe I won't put it on my resume, but what am I going to, if somebody asks me, what have I learned in this last 6 months? I think that's important.
That's a really good challenge to say, hey, in every 6 months, have I learned something new, or have I done something new to put on my resume? I've never heard that before, and it's really got me thinking, and hopefully it's got our audience thinking too.
Yeah, it's a little frightening also.
It is a little frightening, so speaking of, having our resume update every 6 months, a good goal is every 6 months. Are there any other specific skills or qualities that are essential for success, especially, in the finance team?
Yeah. Well, I think, about them more from a technical knowledge perspective. Let's be honest, like, if success in finance also hinges on soft skills, it also hinges on personal qualities, it also hinges on those fungible skills that you can bring in.
Yeah.
Now, this is a long list, but I'm going to try and keep it to say 3, 4 of them quickly, whatever comes on top of my head. I think one important one is, of course, strategic thinking. Are you able to evaluate information? Are you able to make informed judgments? Are you able to solve complex problems? And these are all essential for your strategic planning and risk assessment, right? In the same vein, when you're thinking about evaluating information, and this is something that I said we will be coming to, when I started, data-driven problem solving. Are you able to identify issues? Are you able to analyze data? Are you able to devise effective solutions? And let me tell you, mostly under pressure, and it needs to be quick turnaround, right? So are your skills heightened where you can make these quick decisions? Another one, I don't know if it's just for finance, to be honest, but I think this is across industries and whatever role that you do, is storytelling, right? And specifically to finance, I would add maybe data storytelling.
Yeah.
So are you able to convey complex financial data and concepts to financial experts, maybe like yourself, Adam, and non-experts like me from HR, right? Are you able to break it down for both of us? And I think the last two important ones, again, probably just not for finance, but I think for everybody, would be relationship management. You will have to maintain strong working relationships with clients, with colleagues. Finance is interlinked. You have internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, and how are you able to kind of bring it all together? But I think to be successful, the underlying of everything is curiosity, continuous improvement, right? Like what we discussed. When an industry is changing as frequently and as quickly, it is important to keep that light almost ignited within yourself. And are you curious? If somebody talks about, this is the coding that I did, or this is the report I've automated, do you ask what, how, can you show me? Or do you like, oh, interesting, and move on, right? I think that's the differentiator.
Yeah. Now, do you have any insights in how to stay curious? Because with the ever-changing elements within an organization or within our roles, it's hard to always stay curious.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one is, and these are now very personal pieces, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm in HR and because I worked in finance, will I have the quickness of understanding some of the concepts as a finance professional? No, but I still need to know what my business does, right? So I think few tips would be one. For me, it's important to have that almost that circle of influence. So do you have a mentor that you look up to, right? Do you have your, I would say, informal coffee sessions where you're talking about the work that you're doing? Right. And I feel that spark sometimes mostly comes from informal conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Someone talks about a report that's automated, or someone talks about this conversation with leadership, right? Someone talks about a meeting that happened, and that sparks saying, oh, that's interesting. Is that something I can, take up as well? Or tell me more about it. Right. So one is building that, like I said, that circle of influence. So it could be a mentor, it could be a coach, it could. And what I love is also the reverse mentoring, right? It could be someone who's fresh off the boat in your organization. So it doesn't always have to be someone senior. You see someone who's fantastic with technology and sit with them and ask them, can you give me the basics of, say, coding, Python, or if they have worked on any kind of technology, right? So maybe they know a lot more about AI or ML, or they've read about it. Just sitting and saying, okay, you show me what can you do with it? And another important piece with curiosity is that I feel you don't need to have the solutions. You need to just be clear with your problems and don't worry about having the solution. I think we're so quick to force fit problems into the solution that we know. Right. So sometimes it's just asking, be very clear, saying this is my problem, and then really tapping into the network, right? So I think curiosity is not only about getting skills, but also about saying, who are the people who can enable me to move ahead, right? So the second, I think quite related to that is networking. How often do you network? If you're in finance, if you're in HR, and you're a podcaster like yourself, right? Do you have people that you can have conversations on really upping your game? Because the more you talk to people, you can realize what can you spend. Maybe you feel that, that's not for me. And of course, there's the formal ways of, building continuous improvement. Every organization will have your learning programs, will have platforms that are enable for you. Do you know all those platforms? And mostly they are paid for by the organization. If not, there is nothing more powerful than Google. If you ask Google or ChatGPT, what are the best, places I need to go and find out about the topic, usually the answers are right. So of course, those are your formal methodology. But I think what sometimes works is building, I would say, a strong network of people who's going to keep asking you questions and challenging you, and for you to also challenge. I think that's something you need to do. And if you are not networking within your business or your topic of interest, that's something maybe you should think about. How often do you want to do it, etc.
No, I really appreciate that insight. Sometimes when things get really busy, a lot of organizations are tightening their belts. It becomes really difficult to take the time to have those informal conversations. It becomes difficult to have those water cooler conversations, which if you look at the studies, it's important to have those. We need to have those informal things to get ourselves outside of the box that we put ourselves in, because it can be very difficult as if you're going from task to task to task, you never have time to actually innovate and think outside of what you're working on. So, as somebody who was in finance and has gone to HR, are there any challenges or misconceptions that you can kind of share that you've encountered as you've kind of been able to bridge that gap?
So just to correct you, I've always been in HR. I think the only
Yes.
difference is that I worked with finance and now, of course, broader. The things, the relationship between HR and other business units are often like that chicken and egg dilemma, right? This is interdependence, there's complexity, and not always a friendship, as you say, right? but we need each other, of course. So I would say some of the challenges would be, one is siloed planning. The thing is, we need to be on that table of decision making. So sometimes what happens is, because there are disconnected planning processes where each function operates independently, that means it leads to incomplete data. That means inconsistent assumptions from our end, right? There'll be conflicting analysis on how do we kind of proceed with our people. So siloed planning leads to different priorities. And the problem is business is often incentivized with financial performance, right? Like, are you making money? But for HR, we focus on talent management, on well-being, etc. So potentially sometimes these priorities do not really go together. So that's one. The other one is because of the widening skill gap in the industry, particularly in areas like data science and AI, it becomes very difficult to then find talent well versed in both finance and HR. So then the work we need to do is we'll have to update our practices. We need to meet the expectations of today's job seekers. And now the thing is, business will like, now there are 100 roles open, but we need to find that talent in the market, right? So how do we kind of adapt that? And that's sometimes a gap. So I think the point I was trying to make was that the skills gap is a big piece that we need to work on. And I think the third one I would like to add is that now this is it a challenge or a misconception? I don't know. But I think that the commercial acumen of understanding business, I think a lot of us in HR need to be a lot more clued in. And like I'd mentioned, right, we don't need to be experts, but we definitely need to understand the fundamentals of the business that we are taking care of.
Yeah.
And sometimes that becomes almost a challenge, and business picks up on that, right? And I feel that's an important piece between trust and mistrust when you're working with business. So the minute they understand that you've done your research, you know their business, you know what their people are working for, and you're able to share that, I think there's already a trust that is built. So like I said, I don't know if it's a misconception, but it's definitely a challenge that we need to all work towards.
So no, I appreciate that. So when you're looking at as an HR professional, you already talked about some of the challenges, misconceptions. Are there ways that you can effectively collaborate with, especially the finance team to achieve the shared goals and objectives that we've been referring to?
So I think it's literally the opposite of what I just said, right?
Okay.
I think one thing is early collaboration,
Yeah.
engage early, be proactive, foster cohesion, create viable processes. If there are, weekly meetings, monthly meetings that business are part of, make sure that you're invited and you have a piece for HR and people that they're interested to partake in, right? And you also listen to what are their challenges as well. So I think early collaboration is one. Communication and data sharing, open communication channels, single data sets, right? I think this is very important because sometimes even data sets, what HR uses and what business uses sometimes don't match, right? So how do you kind of make sure that there's that singular data? And like I mentioned, just like your early collaboration, the joint planning, say that, okay, these are your financial plans for the year. Okay, how do we align it to talent strategies? So this also, then it helps for business to believe that it goes with the business objectives, right? So it's important that we come together. And of course, another big one is shared digital tools. So, a certain business might buy certain tools, and we should also look at how do we kind of update ourselves. So make sure that we have what I mentioned earlier, similar data sets, single unit. Are you creating reports of one another? Are you working on business resilience together? I think all of this together will slowly almost like tighten that relationship. And at the end of the day, for someone sitting and working, right, we are a joint up unit, right? Leadership, business, HR, we are a joint up unit. They don't look at us as separate. So what is that best experience that we can give that person coming into the organization? That should be the goal when we come together.
A lot of times when I have these conversations, I always like to end the conversation with, what are your hopes and expectations as you look into the future, especially, the intersection of HR and finance and how, there's so many things changing. There's rapidly changing economy, volatile things in the workplace. It's hard to kind of keep track of things. What are your hopes and expectations as we move forward into this unknown?
Well, I can speak for like the work that I do. For me, I think as a representative in HR, for me, it's stronger strategic partnership, making sure that we have data-driven insights, enhanced collaboration. What I mentioned earlier today on focus on employee well-being, when there's volatility, when there are changes, right? It's also impacting the person in your team. So what are some of the policies around that? Are the people managers equipped to deal with this new environment, this new ecosystem that they probably were not used to as people managers? So are we equipping our leadership with those tools? With technology integration also comes a bit of fear, right? About your role. I keep saying it is not your role that's going away, right? It's the boring stuff that goes away. It means there's something interesting. Your job is evolving and you need to be a part of that, right? To make work a lot more interesting for yourself. And I think, of course, I mean, the last part is on your market, your regulatory adaptability, right? When those changes happen, are we resilient? Are we quick? And that's something, I mean, these are some of the skills that we all need to be having in our little kitty.
Well, Vrinda, I thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me on this podcast, and I really appreciate having you on.
Likewise, thank you very much, and good luck.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.